Hello, everyone. Chris Hobart here, the Wealthologist, and welcome back to another episode of the Wealthologist Weekly, where I try and break down some complex things in the world of finance, maybe in a simple and a fun way that hopefully makes sense to you. Now, I am sure you have heard this one before, whether it's on the news or maybe in some heated political conversation you're having these days, but government spending causes inflation. So the question today is it true? And today we're going to dive into the deep end of this topic to sort of find out the fact or the fiction. And trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. So let's kick things off by saying this loud and clear. The government, in my opinion, has gotten a bit too big. When it tries to do too much, it begins to slow down the economy. It messes with living standards, and it can begin to make us squabble over fixed slices of the pie rather than growing that pie altogether. So I'm really for cutting government size down to something more manageable. The problem is both sides seem like they like to keep growing this thing, which costs us more tax money. Here's the thing. This is where we've got to be careful in all of this. Government spending isn't the villain that is causing inflation, though. Let's break this down with a simple example. Imagine the government taxes or borrows $1,000 from Peter and then hands that same $1,000 to Pauline. Now, Peter doesn't have the money anymore, but Pauline does. Is there suddenly more money in the economy? No, there's not. It's the same money. The money's just moved from one person to another. Nothing new has been created. So if the government spending doesn't automatically cause inflation, the question we've got to ask is, what does? Well, the real culprit is when central banks like the Federal Reserve, they begin to create excess money. And inflation happens when more money is injected into the economy than the economy actually needs. Now, at its core, it's not about rising prices. It's about the value of money going down. So your dollar doesn't go as far because there are more of them floating around. And when the central banks print too much money, we get inflation. Now, government spending all by itself, guess what? Good news, it doesn't create new money. Now, don't just take my word for it. Even one of the all-time greats, the economist Milton Friedman, backs this up. He said, and I quote, "Fiscal policy is critical in determining what fraction of total national income is spent by the government and who bears the burden of that expenditure. By itself, it is not important for inflation." I guess Milton said it better than I ever could. Now, some folks think that when the government borrows money, it's magically creating new money out of thin air. But that's just not how it works either. The government borrows money from places like China and Japan, as well as retirees and banks. And when these entities buy U.S. Treasury bonds, they use dollars they already earned. It's just a transfer of money, like Peter and Pauline, like we talked about earlier. Now, the only difference is instead of individuals, the government and institutions are doing the borrowing and the lending. So when China buys U.S. debt, those dollars go to the U.S. government, and China can't spend those dollars on U.S. imports anymore. Similarly, when a bank buys government debt, that money's no longer available for loans. It's just shifting cash from one account to another. You're not creating any new money. So again, what does cause inflation? Well, here's where it gets tricky, and I think also essential. If the Federal Reserve decides to create new money and use that to buy government debt, then we've got a problem. You see, that's inflationary because new money is being created and pumped into the economy. But, and this is a big but, it's the creation of money, not the government spending it itself. And that's the real issue at hand. Now, I want to be real clear. I absolutely think that the government spending needs to be cut. Republican, Democrat, wherever you are, I think we can all agree somehow, somewhere they can cut some of it. I think that's critical for economic growth. But let's make sure we're cutting it for the right reasons. Now, many rightly point out that the more the government borrows and taxes, the less money is left for the private sector. And that's definitely true. The economy's pie doesn't grow as fast when the government takes more money. Fewer goods and services are produced, and that can lead to higher prices. But higher prices in this case aren't inflation. They're the result of supply and demand. The government takes more, so there's less for the rest of us. Now, the federal government could technically offset this by pulling back the money supply. But oftentimes, they do the opposite and they end up printing more money. And that is what causes inflation. So what's the big takeaway? A growing government can hold back economic growth for sure, but it's not the ultimate driver of inflation. I want to go back to the 1970s. The U.S. was dealing with rampant inflation at the time. Now, how did we fix it? Well, by pulling back on the growth of the money supply. And you know what? Contrary to what many people think, the U.S. doesn't need easy money or low interest rates to thrive. The tech sector has done great with prices that decline over time. So maybe let's talk about cutting some government spending for the right reasons. It's not about inflation. It's about creating a more accessible, fairer economy where workers get to keep more of what they earn and businesses have the freedom to grow and expand. And hey, I get it. Saying spending causes inflation, it sounds great, specifically on a bumper sticker or as a talking point. But I got to tell you, we owe it to ourselves to understand the real story at hand. As always, I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Wealthologist Weekly. If you enjoyed today's breakdown, if it helped you understand why inflation is doing what it is in a different way than we've talked about before, well, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and also hit that notification bell to avoid missing any of our future episodes. Until next time, I am Chris Hobart, the Wealthologist. Stay informed and stay empowered.